In the midst of the harsh winter, when snow falls like silence over a devastated land, a woman walks on the edge of death. 3 newborns clutch to her chest, her home consumed by flames, her past shattered. She has no idea what fate has in store. It is in this dark moment that the man known as Red Wolf appears, a feared and solitary Apache warrior whose path will intertwine with hers in a way none of us could have imagined. What secrets hide in the shadows of the storm? How far is a mother willing to go to protect what she loves most? When duty and desire become enemies, where does the line between sacrifice and passion end? Listen to this story. Feel the struggle, the fear, the forbidden love, and tell me, do you believe true love can overcome all barriers, even in cold and merciless lands? Get ready to enter this journey, where every step is a battle and every breath a promise. They say pain teaches, but there are pains that only leave scars and burn like the fire that took everything she loved. Clara Hayes had never felt completely safe since she buried her husband on the outskirts of Willow Creek. A year before, she was just a woman in a light dress, hands firm on the loom and faith in her heart. Now she was a widow, with 3 children in her arms and the world collapsing around her. Billy, Eli, and Mary, her triplets, had their father's eyes and their mother's uncertain fate. And that afternoon, when the sky turned dark with smoke and wild horses raced across the fields, Clara knew hell had arrived. Captain Jed Harlan had no soul, only thirst for land, for power, for blood. He and his mercenaries, with eyes as cold as tarnished silver, set fire to the Hayes ranch without hesitation. They were after gold or revenge, or simply found pleasure in chaos. There was no just cause, only cruelty. And Clara, her heart torn apart, took her children and fled to the mountains, guided by the instinct only a mother knows. Snow fell before nightfall. Wolves howled among the rocks. The cold cut like a knife. Clara was bleeding from a wound on her leg, her feet bare, her lips cracked. But she didn't stop. She carried Mary in her arms, while Billy and Eli trembled behind her, trying to be brave. She whispered prayers through clenched teeth, but the sky seemed deaf. And then she fell. Darkness took her slowly, like a sheet of ice over the soul. The last image was the faces of her children pressed against her chest. Then, only silence. But sometimes fate hides its heroes in the most unlikely places. It was Red Wolf who found her before dawn. A renegade, Apache, exiled by his own tribe for refusing to kill innocent settlers. He had walked alone for years, like a shadow in the snow. He was half white, half native, and completely rejected by both worlds. But there was fire in his chest and compassion in his eyes. When he saw Clara fallen, her lips purple, and the child unconscious beside her, Red Wolf felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. Without saying a word, he carried the woman and her children to his hideout in the northern caves. He lit a fire, gave water, and waited. Clara opened her eyes hours later, still weak, still wounded, around her deer skins and silence. And that man, with long hair and dark eyes, sitting, watching over her like a guardian from another world. She shrank back in fear, but found no threat in him. Only mystery. That's when she understood. She was alive, but lost among enemies. And even so, something in her heart, maybe despair, maybe destiny, wasn't afraid. Because sometimes the strongest bonds are born from suffering. And love, when it comes through pain, never leaves the same way. The snow kept falling outside, but inside that cave, Clara felt a strange warmth. It didn't come just from the fire or from the furs Red Wolf had laid over her and the children. It was something deeper, as if that man whom she barely knew was holding the collapsing world together with the sheer strength of his silence. Red Wolf didn't say many words, but every gesture seemed filled with stories that would never be told. He fed the children, cleaned Clara's wounds with steady and careful hands. And when she tried to thank him, he only responded with a serene look, as if to say, "No need, I've been in the dark too." In the days that followed, Clara tried to understand who that man was. His features told of two origins: the brown skin of the Apaches, but the light eyes inherited from his white father. Red Wolf was the son of a sheriff who never claimed him, and of a native woman who died running away with him as a baby. He grew up between two worlds, but was never accepted in either. In the village, he was the unwanted half-breed. Among whites, just another savage. He was rejected by everyone except Clara. She saw in his eyes a kind of loneliness she recognized. Because deep down, those who truly love always carry a void, a hole left by someone who left too soon, or by dreams that never bloomed. And in that shared loneliness, the two began to recognize each other. But not everything was silence and shelter. Further south, Clara's trail had been discovered. Jed Harlan, the man who burned the ranch and hunted bounties with a taste for death, had spread posters with her face. He called her a traitor, claimed she had fled with murderous savages. He offered gold for her head, and the desert began to fill with armed men driven by greed, not justice. In Red Wolf's hideout, Clara began to realize that this refuge was also a powder keg. They were not alone. At night, eyes lit up among the rocks. They were the white mountain Apaches, the tribe Red Wolf had abandoned years ago. They had been following from afar, watching, and when they finally confronted him, it wasn't with weapons, but with questions. "What are you doing here with a white woman?" asked Chief Tallbear, old as the pines and hard as stone. "You chose exile. She brings the eyes of the white man and the scent of death." Clara stood firm. She didn't apologize. She only held her children tightly against her chest and faced those painted, proud, suspicious faces. She had no weapons, only truth. And sometimes, that's enough. It was Nakoma, the tribe's healer, who intervened, a woman with a face marked by time and eyes that saw beyond flesh. Mary, the smallest of the triplets, had a high fever. And it was Nakoma who saved the child with roots and chants that seemed to come from another era. But when she finished, she said something that chilled the air in the cave. "Your blood called bad eyes. They are coming, and they will not forgive." Red Wolf knew it was true. He knew that bringing Clara there had awakened forces that had long slept in silence, forces from outside and from within the tribe itself. Some young warriors, led by Grey Wolf, wanted war. Others wanted Clara gone, and the time to decide was running out. But that night, while the fire crackled and the children slept, Clara and Red Wolf stood face to face, alone. She touched his shoulder and said, "You saved me. But who saves you?" He lowered his eyes, and for a second, just a second, the warrior's mask fell, and in its place there was a man, a tired man, wounded, and starving for something he didn't even know how to name. They didn't kiss that night, but something inside them changed. Because when two broken souls recognize each other, love begins before the touch. And sometimes the hardest war is against what we feel. Dawn came with the weight of a decision that hadn't yet been spoken, out loud, but already burned in everyone's heart. Clara knew she couldn't stay. Red Wolf knew he couldn't let her go. And the Apaches, they were no longer a village. They were becoming a battlefield, ready to explode. The days that followed brought more than cold and tension. They brought glances, whispers, blades sharpened in the shadows, and Clara's name whispered among the warriors like a sign of bad luck. She walked through the camp with her children clinging to her skirts, head held high, but inside, she bled. She knew she was seen as the omen of war, and even so, Red Wolf stood by her side, silent, steady, like a tree that does not bend, even when the winds scream. One night, sitting by the river, Clara asked, "Why were you alone for so long?" He took a while to respond, looked at the water, as if the words were hidden there, because love has always cost too much. Clara said nothing. She simply held his hand. And in that touch, there were no promises, only truth. But the time for peace was ending. Jed Harlan was not a man who gave up. Upon learning that Clara was still alive and that she was protected by renegade Indians, he doubled the bounty. He said anyone who brought her head or the children would be granted land, gold, and pardon. The forest began to fill with hunters, and within the tribe, tension turned to poison. Grey Wolf, young and hot-headed, had hated Red Wolf since they were boys. He saw in the situation a chance to seize power. He gathered discontented warriors, promised to drive the whites out and to bring honor back to the tribe, even if he had to stain the land with blood. But he went further, much further, in secret. Grey Wolf rode out to Harlan's men and sold everything. The path to the camp, the guard schedules, the number of warriors. For a sack of coins, he betrayed his own people, swearing that once Clara was captured, the rest of the whites would come. And then they could destroy them all at once. Betrayal. It wasn't the first, but it was the one that nearly killed them all. Meanwhile, Red Wolf was preparing the tribe. Clara, with a courage few noticed, taught the younger ones to use blades, knives, spears. It was what they knew how to use, and it was all they had. Children watched their mothers sharpen wooden tips. The elders crafted traps. And Clara's eyes never stopped scanning the horizon. She knew they were coming, but she also knew she was no longer just a widow. She was a lioness. And when love is born in a field of pain, it becomes strength. That dawn, Mary, the smallest of the triplets, woke up crying. Said she heard footsteps and voices. Red Wolf stood up, armed, muscles tense, but it was already too late. From atop the rocks came the first shots. Harlan's men had arrived. The sound of gunfire tore through the night, awakening echoes of fear and fury. Red Wolf grabbed Clara's hand, his eyes ablaze with a mix of desperation and determination. The camp erupted into chaos. Screams, running, the dry snap of arrows cutting through the darkness. Clara held the triplets close to her chest, feeling each rapid heartbeat as she watched the tribe's warriors fight with ferocity. She was no longer just a wounded woman. She was a force of nature, ready to protect her family at any cost. But in the midst of the confusion, a treacherous shadow moved forward. Grey Wolf. He wasn't looking to save anyone, only himself. And to survive, he was willing to hand Clara over to Harlan's men. Captured, she met the empty gaze of Captain Harlan, who smiled like a man already victorious. But Clara wasn't afraid. Fear was a luxury that fire and loss had stripped from her long ago. Meanwhile, Red Wolf fought to rally the few who remained, his heart torn by betrayal, but fueled by the hope of rescuing Clara and saving what was left of his tribe. This wasn't just a battle for land or even for life. It was a battle for a freedom that few dared to dream of. And in that moment, Red Wolf had to choose: save Clara or protect his people from total destruction. The cold before dawn felt crueler than ever. Red Wolf felt the weight of the choice crushing his chest. Every second without Clara was an invisible knife, but he knew that if he abandoned the tribe, his people would be lost. If he risked everything to save her, they could lose it all, even hope itself. With his mind ablaze, he gathered the warriors, who still trusted him. "We cannot lose our soul," he said firmly, "but we also can't leave Clara in Harlan's hands." Love is not weakness, it's strength, and today we'll prove it. Meanwhile, Clara, imprisoned, refused to break. Jed Harlan's eyes gleamed with hatred, but she stared at him like someone staring death in the face and refusing to yield. In the quiet moments, she thought of Red Wolf, of the triplets, of the fire that consumed the ranch that had once been her home, and she found strength to keep going. Outside, the attack was imminent. Red Wolf was preparing one final ambush, not just to save Clara, but to erase the stain of betrayal running through his tribe, because sometimes the only way to start over is to fight to the end. And he was ready for it. The sky was still dark. When Red Wolf and his men advanced, shadows among the trees, their hearts pounding like war drums, they had little left, only the courage that remained and the certainty that the night would decide everything. Each step was silent, calculated. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash. Ahead, the flames of Harlan's camp licked the night sky, a cruel reminder of all they had already lost. Meanwhile, Clara, bound and cold, listened to the wind and felt the chill of solitude, but in her chest a fire still burned. She knew Red Wolf would come, because love born in the middle of a storm does not fear the darkness. At the exact moment, Red Wolf stormed the camp like a streak of wildfire. The battle was brutal. The clash of metal against metal, cries of pain and fury echoing through the mountains. Every strike was for Clara, for their children, for the tribe, for everything that could still be saved. Grey Wolf tried to run, but betrayal has a price. And that night, he learned there is no forgiveness for those who sell their own people. In the middle of the chaos, Red Wolf found Clara. Their eyes met, and there, between blood and smoke, there were no words, only a silent promise. No matter what came, they would face it together. Until the end, the battle ended, but the pain lingered, sharp as the wind cutting through the mountains. Clara and Red Wolf were together, but the cost of war was etched into their bodies and souls. The flames devoured what remained of the big camp, and the heavy silence said more than any words could. The triplets sobbed in her arms, frightened but safe. It was a new beginning, even if the ground beneath their feet was scorched. Red Wolf took Clara's hand, his weary eyes searching hers for strength, because in that moment, love was the only thing keeping them alive. They knew the future would be uncertain, marked by loss and struggle, but they also knew that as long as they were together, nothing could extinguish the flame they had ignited in the heart of the desert. In the end, it wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for hope, for family, for forbidden love, a love that defied death and won. And Willow Creek would never be the same again. The sun rose timidly on the horizon, casting light over a land marked by fire and blood. Clara, Red Wolf, and the triplets crouched among the rocks, gazing at what remained of the place that had once been home. Now, a field of memories and broken promises. But there, among the ashes, a seed of resistance remained, a strength that could not be destroyed. Clara felt her heart pounding, not just from fear, but from the certainty that this pain would make them stronger. Red Wolf, his face scarred by battle, turned to her and said, his voice steady, "No matter where we go, as long as we're together, we'll find a way." And in that moment, the past and present merged, like the wind that carries the leaves away, leaving room for what is yet to come. Because sometimes true love is born from chaos, and Willow Creek, though wounded, was beginning to rise again. The days that followed were silent, almost ghostly. Clara and Red Wolf, along with the triplets, hid in the shadows of the mountains, far from the hungry eyes of Harlan's hunters. Every moment was a battle to keep hope alive, a breath against the despair that threatened to consume everything. But danger never sleeps. Every sound in the forest sent their hearts racing. And even among those who once seemed like allies, distrust began to grow, like a weed choking out what little good remained. Red Wolf knew they couldn't run forever. The war that had started in Willow Creek now burned in their spirits, a fight that demanded more than strength. It demanded the courage to face the cruelest enemy of all, betrayal from within. Clara, though afraid, felt her love for him grow stronger, firm like the roots of ancient trees. She knew that together they could face whatever came, because deep down, their love was the last resistance against the darkness. And as the sun set, they prepared for what would be the final battle, a war that would decide not only their lives, but the fate of everyone they loved. The night before the final battle came quietly, almost like time itself had paused. Clara sat beside the fire, the triplets sleeping around her, and looked at Red Wolf with a mix of love and fear. They both knew the dawn would bring the ultimate clash, a fight for survival, for justice, and for a chance at a future. Red Wolf, his gaze steady, took her hand and said, "If we don't come back today, I want you to know, you are the light that lit my life in the darkest of nights." She smiled, despite the sadness tightening her chest. "And you are my heart, Red Wolf, my home." They embraced, knowing that in that moment there were no promises, only one deep truth. Their love was stronger than any storm. As the first rays of sunlight began tearing across the sky, the warriors took their positions. The fate of Willow Creek, of Clara, Red Wolf, and their children was about to be sealed. The sun had barely risen when war erupted. The silence of dawn was shattered by gunfire and the roar of battle cries. Red Wolf was at the center of the chaos, his eyes blazing with the quiet fury of a man who knew each second might be his last. He fought like a hurricane, fierce, unrelenting, determined. Every blow he struck wasn't just for himself, but for Clara, for the triplets, and for the tribe that had become his family. Adrenaline coursed through his veins, the scent of gunpowder and blood mixing with the dry earth. In the midst of the fight, a mercenary emerged from behind a tree, weapon aimed directly at Red Wolf. With the reflexes of a predator, he dove to the side, dodging the shot that splintered the wood beside him. In one fluid motion, he drew his knife and struck the man down before he could react. But the battle was brutal, and the number of enemies seemed endless. Red Wolf felt a sharp pain as a blow hit his shoulder, burning like living fire. Even so, he didn't hesitate. He bit his lip, sweating, and kept fighting, his muscles fueled by the will to protect. When he saw Clara surrounded by two men, his fury exploded. With a fierce cry, he hurled himself at the attackers, fighting with power and precision until he drove them off. Clara, though terrified, held the triplets close, her eyes locking with his in a moment of pure connection and hope. The battle felt like it lasted an eternity, but slowly, Red Wolf's courage and strategy began to turn the tide. The mercenaries, tired and disorganized, were forced to retreat, leaving the field to those who truly loved that land and that family. When the last enemy vanished into the trees, Red Wolf dropped to his knees, exhausted but alive. Clara ran to him, cradling his wounded face, tears mixing with the dirt of battle. "You're alive," she whispered, her voice trembling with relief. "For you," he replied with a weary smile. For us, they knew the fight wasn't truly over, but that morning, hope was reborn. And as long as they were together, the impossible became possible. The sun now bathed the sky in gold when silence, heavy and almost sacred, settled over the battlefield. Clara and Red Wolf stood side by side, watching the triplets run among the trees, free and laughing, the purest proof that tomorrow was still possible. The ranch, once Clara's stronghold, was now just a pile of ashes and ruins. But in the heart of that scorched land, a seed of hope began to sprout. Because what fire cannot destroy is the strength they carried within. Red Wolf, his shoulder still aching from the fight, held Clara's hand with tenderness and reverence. She was the woman who had weathered storms and wars with him, who faced unimaginable losses and never gave up. Their eyes met, filled with the same passion and unspoken promise that had bound them from the very beginning. The triplets, innocent and curious, ran as if celebrating life, and that's exactly what they were doing, celebrating a victory that wasn't about destroying the enemy, but about preserving what's most pure and true: family, love, and hope. Clara took a deep breath, the fresh morning air feeling like a rebirth. "We survived," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "because we were brave, because we loved." Red Wolf smiled, tired but whole, "and because together we're unstoppable." In that moment, Willow Creek ceased to be a battlefield and became a symbol of resistance against hate, of unity against pain, and above all, of a love that defied the impossible. And won. They hadn't just survived. They had begun to write a new story, one that would never be forgotten, passed down through generations, where love would always triumph over darkness. And so, between the shadows of the past and the light of the future, Clara, Red Wolf, and their children moved forward, not just as survivors, but as guardians of an eternal legacy. Because in the end, the greatest victory is the one born from the heart. If you were moved by the story of Clara, Red Wolf, and their children, remember this: in the midst of darkness, love always finds a way. If you enjoyed this powerful tale of courage, passion, and hope, don't forget to like, share it with those who love stories of resilience and romance, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapters of this emotional saga. Join us on this journey through the Old West, where every story is an invitation to feel, to live, and to dream. Until next time.